December 21, 1939, Kola River, Finland. Finnish rifleman Simo Häyhä lay motionless in a snowbank, dressed entirely in white, invisible against the frozen landscape. Temperature, -40 degrees Celsius. Visibility, limited to 100 meters through falling snow. Soviet forces, 750,000 soldiers invading Finland. Finnish forces, 300,000 defending their homeland. Häyhä was 5 feet 3 inches tall, a farmer, age 34. He carried an old Mosin Nagant rifle with no telescopic sight, just iron sights, the same basic aiming system soldiers had used for a century. While other snipers relied on scopes to magnify their targets, Häyhä refused them. Scopes fogged in the cold, they reflected sunlight, they required raising your head higher, exposing yourself. Häyhä had a simpler philosophy: get close, stay invisible, shoot straight, survive. On this single day, December 21, 1939, Häyhä would kill 25 Soviet soldiers, 25 confirmed kills in one day, an impossible number. Yet witnesses documented every single one. Over the next 100 days of combat, Häyhä would kill over 500 Soviet soldiers. Some estimates reached 542, all with iron sights, all while wearing white camouflage and disappearing into snowbanks, all while Soviet artillery fired blindly into forests, hoping to kill him. All while Soviet commanders sent counter-snipers specifically to hunt him down. The Red Army called him Biała Śmierć, the White Death. Soviet soldiers refused to advance through areas where Häyhä operated. Entire units froze in terror at the thought of entering his kill zone. Stalin's commanders launched artillery barrages on entire forest sections, just hoping to eliminate one man. They never did. Häyhä survived the war, barely. On March 6, 1940, an explosive bullet shattered his jaw, taking half his face. Soviet soldiers thought he was dead. They piled his body with corpses, but a Finnish soldier noticed his leg twitching. Häyhä was alive. He woke from a coma on March 13, 1940, the exact day Finland and the Soviet Union signed a peace treaty ending the war. When asked years later if he felt remorse for killing over 500 men, Häyhä answered simply, "I did what I was told to do, as best as I could. There would be no Finland if everyone else hadn't done the same." This is the verified true story of the deadliest sniper in military history, the farmer from Karelia who became a legend, the man who proved that patience, skill, and absolute refusal to be seen matter more than technology, numbers, or overwhelming force. Before we dive into this story, subscribe and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. Now, relax, grab your coffee, and enjoy this beautiful story. Simo Häyhä was born on December 17, 1905, in Rautjärvi, Finland, a small farming municipality in southeastern Finland near the Russian border. The landscape was harsh: dense forests, bitter winters, vast stretches of wilderness where survival required intimate knowledge of the land. His family were farmers, not wealthy landowners, but subsistence farmers who worked land they owned, growing enough to survive, but never enough to prosper. Häyhä was one of 8 children. In rural Finland in the early 1900s, this meant constant work from childhood. There was no leisure, no easy path, just farming, hunting, and surviving the brutal Finnish winters. From early childhood, Häyhä spent his free time in the forests hunting. His first rifle was an old Russian-built Mosin Nagant M91, a bolt-action rifle left over from when Finland was part of the Russian Empire. The rifle was older than Häyhä himself, but it worked, and in Häyhä's hands it worked extraordinarily well. Finnish winters forced hunters to become expert marksmen. Ammunition was expensive. In a farming family with limited resources, every bullet had to count. You didn't fire until you were certain of a kill. You didn't waste shots. This enforced discipline created exceptional shooters, men who could hit a moving rabbit at 100 meters with iron sights because missing meant going hungry. Häyhä excelled at this. By his teenage years, he was known locally as an exceptional shot. Friends and family later described him as quiet, mild-mannered, introverted. He wasn't physically imposing. At 5 feet 3 inches, he was short even for Finnish standards. But his patience and shooting ability were remarkable. In 1925, at age 20, Häyhä began his mandatory military service. Finland had gained independence from Russia in 1917, and by the 1920s had established its own military with conscription requirements. Every Finnish male served approximately 15 months in the army. Häyhä was assigned to a bicycle battalion, light infantry that moved quickly between positions. His officers quickly recognized his shooting ability and sent him to formal sniper training. There, military instructors recorded that Häyhä possessed an uncanny ability to judge distances with extreme accuracy, a crucial skill for sniping. He completed his service in 1927 with high marks. He returned to Rautjärvi and resumed farming. For the next 12 years, Häyhä lived quietly. He farmed his family's land. He hunted in the forests. He participated in shooting competitions, winning numerous local and regional championships. He was a member of the Civil Guard, Finland's volunteer defense organization, where he continued honing his marksmanship. By the late 1930s, Häyhä had become one of Finland's best shots. He won shooting competitions using the same old Mosin Nagant he'd hunted with since childhood. When asked why he didn't use more modern rifles, Häyhä's answer was pragmatic. I know this rifle. It knows me. Why change? This philosophy, intimate knowledge of his weapon rather than reliance on technology, would define his approach to sniping. On November 30th, 1939, the Soviet Union invaded Finland. The Winter War had begun, and Simo Häyhä, the quiet farmer from Rautjärvi, would become the deadliest sniper in military history. The Winter War was militarily absurd from the start. The Soviet Union had 750,000 troops, 6,000 tanks, and 3,800 aircraft. By any conventional military analysis, Finland should have been conquered in weeks. Stalin wanted Finnish territory to create a buffer zone around Leningrad. He offered to trade land, Soviet territory, for Finnish territory. Finland refused. Stalin, expecting an easy victory, ordered the invasion. The Red Army crossed the border on November 30th, anticipating they'd reach Helsinki within weeks. Soviet propaganda claimed Finland would surrender immediately. Soviet soldiers were told they'd be home for Christmas. They weren't. Finland fought back with ferocity that shocked the world. The terrain favored defense: dense forests, frozen lakes, deep snow, brutal cold. Soviet tanks became trapped in forests where they couldn't maneuver. Soviet supply lines stretched across hostile territory. Soviet soldiers, many from southern republics, were unprepared for -40 temperatures. Finnish forces used tactics perfectly suited to the environment: small mobile units, skis for rapid movement, white camouflage, intimate knowledge of terrain, and devastating hit-and-run attacks called Matti tactics, surrounding and destroying larger Soviet forces piece by piece. And they had snipers. Hundreds of Finnish hunters turned soldiers who knew how to move silently through snow, how to disappear against white landscapes, and how to shoot with deadly accuracy. The deadliest of them all was Simo Häyhä. Häyhä was mobilized immediately when war began. At 34 years old, he was older than most soldiers, but in peak physical condition from years of farming and hunting. He reported to the 6th Company of JR-34, a regiment assigned to defend the Kola River in southeastern Finland. The Kola sector became one of the war's most intense battlegrounds. Soviet forces attacked repeatedly, trying to break through Finnish lines.
If they succeeded, they could split Finnish defenses and advance to cut the country in half. Häyhä's company commander, Captain Arne Juutilainen, recognized Häyhä's shooting ability immediately during first combat. He gave Häyhä special permission to operate independently as a sniper rather than stay with standard infantry formations. This freedom was crucial. Häyhä could position himself where he thought most effective, rather than being constrained by unit movements. He could hunt. Häyhä's tactics were deceptively simple, but devastatingly effective. First, camouflage. Häyhä wore entirely white winter clothing. He packed snow around his position to eliminate any non-white contrasts. Before each shot, he would pile fresh snow in front of his position so muzzle blast wouldn't create a visible puff, revealing his location.
He would put snow in his mouth to prevent his breath from condensing in the cold air, a visible white cloud that would give away his position. Second, positioning. Häyhä never shot from obvious locations. He avoided high ground where snipers typically positioned. Instead, he chose unexpected angles, slight depressions, edges of tree lines, positions where Soviet soldiers wouldn't think to look. He positioned himself close to Soviet lines, sometimes within 100 meters, because at close range, iron sights were as accurate as scopes, and he could shoot faster. Third, patience. Häyhä would remain motionless for hours. He understood that movement attracted attention. He waited for targets to present themselves rather than hunting actively. Soviet soldiers moving through his sector had no idea he was there until he fired. Fourth, speed. Once Häyhä fired, he worked his bolt-action rifle with incredible speed. Later estimates suggested he could fire and rechamber in under 2 seconds. This rapid fire created confusion. Soviet soldiers hearing multiple shots often thought they were being engaged by several snipers, not one man. Fifth, escape. After shooting, Häyhä would often remain in position rather than immediately relocating. Soviet counter-sniper doctrine said snipers would move after firing. Häyhä exploited this by staying put, allowing Soviet forces to search elsewhere while he remained invisible in his original position. The results were extraordinary. In the first week of combat, Häyhä killed over 40 Soviet soldiers. By the end of December 1939, his confirmed kill count exceeded 100. By January 1940, over 200. By February, over 400. The Red Army began to realize that someone or something was systematically destroying their forces in the Kala sector. Soviet soldiers started reporting a phantom sniper who appeared from nowhere, killed multiple men, and vanished. They called him Belaya Smert, the White Death. December 21, 1939 was the longest night of the year. In southeastern Finland, the sun barely rose above the horizon, providing only a few hours of dim twilight before darkness returned. Soviet forces launched a major assault on Finnish positions at Kola. The plan was to overwhelm Finnish defenses with massed infantry, punch through the lines, and finally break the stalemate that had frustrated Soviet commanders for weeks. Häyhä positioned himself before dawn at the edge of a tree line overlooking a frozen field that Soviet forces would need to cross. He had scouted this position days earlier, identifying it as a natural choke point. Soviet forces advancing here would be exposed with limited cover. As Soviet infantry began their assault, crossing the open ground in waves, Häyhä began firing. One shot. A Soviet soldier fell. Häyhä worked the bolt, chambered another round, acquired the next target, fired, another Soviet down. Bolt, chamber, aim, fire, again, again, again. Häyhä's rate of fire was so rapid that Soviet soldiers thought they were being engaged by multiple shooters. They dove for cover, returned fire blindly into the tree line, but couldn't pinpoint his exact location. Häyhä's white camouflage made him invisible against the snow-covered forest edge. Finnish witnesses who observed through field glasses later reported that Häyhä maintained this rate of fire for over 4 hours. The Mosin Nagant rifle barrel became hot despite the freezing temperature.
Häyhä would pack snow around the barrel to cool it between volleys. By day's end, Finnish commanders counted the casualties in Häyhä's sector. 25 confirmed Soviet dead, all from rifle fire, all within approximately 150 meters from where Häyhä had positioned himself. 25 kills in one day by one man with iron sights, in sub-zero temperatures with limited visibility. This wasn't warfare as modern militaries understood it. This was something primal, a hunter who had perfected his craft to inhuman levels of skill. Soviet commanders receiving casualty reports demanded to know what had happened. How could one sector sustain such disproportionate losses? Prisoners interrogated later reported there was fear spreading among Soviet troops about the invisible Finnish sniper operating in the Kala area. The White Death was becoming a legend, and legends are even more terrifying than reality. By January 1940, Soviet High Command was aware of Simo Häyhä. Intelligence reports identified him by name. His kill count, now over 300, was documented in Soviet casualty analyses. Stalin's generals made a decision. This one Finnish sniper was having a disproportionate psychological impact on Soviet morale. He had to be eliminated. The Soviets tried multiple approaches. Counter-snipers. The Red Army deployed experienced snipers specifically to hunt Häyhä. These were skilled marksmen with scoped rifles and orders to find and kill the White Death. Häyhä killed them. Soviet counter-snipers made a critical error. They used scopes. In the Finnish winter, scopes fogged, frosted, and reflected light. Häyhä could spot the glint of scope glass. He would position himself, wait for the counter-sniper to expose himself, and fire. Multiple Soviet snipers sent to kill Häyhä were themselves killed by him. Artillery barrages. Soviet artillery began conducting systematic bombardments of forested areas where Häyhä believed to operate. Entire grid squares would be saturated with high explosive shells, destroying forests in the hope of killing one man. Häyhä survived by constant movement. He never stayed in one position long enough for artillery to be effectively targeted. Finnish defense doctrine emphasized dispersion. Never concentrate forces where artillery can destroy them. Häyhä took this to extremes, operating alone, invisible, impossible to target. Infantry sweeps. Soviet commanders organized large-scale infantry sweeps through suspected Häyhä operating areas. Hundreds of soldiers would advance in line, searching forests, hoping to flush him out. Häyhä simply let them pass. He would bury himself in snow, covered in white camouflage, motionless, while Soviet soldiers walked within meters of his position. Once they passed, he would resume hunting. Rewards. Soviet commanders offered rewards for anyone who killed or captured Häyhä. The bounty reached significant sums. Soviet soldiers were promised promotions, medals, and monetary rewards for eliminating the White Death. No one collected. Häyhä remained uncaptured, unkilled, continuing to operate with devastating effectiveness. The psychological impact on Soviet forces was severe. Entire units refused to advance through areas where Häyhä was believed to be operating. Soldiers would desert positions rather than patrol sectors associated with the White Death. Soviet morale in the Kala region was deteriorating not from battlefield defeats, but from the terror of one invisible sniper. Finnish commanders recognized Häyhä's strategic value extended beyond his actual kills, his legend demoralizing Soviet forces disproportionately. They began allowing war correspondents to interview Häyhä, and his story spread through Finnish newspapers, then to international press. The Soviet Union, struggling to explain why their invasion was failing, found themselves faced with stories of a ghost-like Finnish farmer who was single-handedly destroying Soviet battalions. It was propaganda gold for Finland and a nightmare for Soviet command. By January 1940, Häyhä's confirmed kill count exceeded 500. Some sources claim 542. The exact number became impossible to verify because Häyhä was operating across such wide areas and battlefield conditions made precise casualty attribution difficult. What was certain, Simo Häyhä had become the most effective individual combatant in the entire Winter War. One man, with an old rifle and iron sights, inflicted casualties equivalent to a small artillery battalion. For 3 months, Häyhä had operated with seeming invincibility. Over 500 Soviet dead, countless counter-sniper attempts failed, artillery barrages survived. He had become a mythical, the unkillable White Death. On March 6, 1940, that myth ended. The exact circumstances remain debated. Some accounts say a Soviet sniper finally got lucky. Others claim a Soviet soldier using an explosive bullet hit him by chance during a firefight. Häyhä himself never definitively explained what happened, as his injuries left him unable to speak clearly for months. What is certain, an explosive or high-velocity round struck him in the face. The bullet entered through his left cheek, destroying his jaw, shattering teeth, exiting through the right side of his face. The damage was catastrophic. Half his face was essentially gone. The impact knocked him unconscious immediately. Finnish soldiers nearby heard the shot and Häyhä's collapse. They rushed to his position, expecting to find him dead. Häyhä was unconscious, his face destroyed, massive bleeding. He had no pulse that rescuers could detect. Standard battlefield procedure would have been to leave him to dead and focus on living wounded. But Häyhä's legend meant Finnish soldiers refused to abandon him. They carried his body, because they believed it was a body, back to Finnish lines. A Finnish medic examining Häyhä noticed his leg twitching, a faint sign of life.
The medic began emergency treatment, focusing on stopping the massive facial bleeding. Häyhä was evacuated to a field hospital, then to a more advanced medical facility in Finland's interior. Doctors examining him were frank. Survival was unlikely. The jaw destruction meant he would likely die from shock, infection, or inability to breathe properly. If he somehow survived, he would never speak again, never eat normally, probably never regain consciousness. Häyhä went into a coma. Days passed, then a week, then 2 weeks. On March 13, 1940, exactly 1 week after he was shot, Simo Häyhä woke up. The date was significant. March 13, 1940 was the day Finland and the Soviet Union signed the Moscow Peace Treaty, ending the Winter War. Häyhä woke on the day the war he'd fought so extraordinarily ended. When he regained consciousness, half his face was bandaged. He couldn't speak, his jaw was shattered and would require multiple surgeries. But he was alive. Impossibly, incredibly, he had survived an injury that should have killed him instantly. Finnish newspapers, which had been preparing obituaries for the legendary White Death, instead ran stories of his miraculous survival. The symbolism was powerful. Finland had survived the Soviet invasion. Häyhä had survived his catastrophic wound. Both should have died. Neither did. The Moscow Peace Treaty was harsh on Finland. The country ceded approximately 11% of its territory to the Soviet Union, including the entire Karelian Isthmus where Häyhä's home village of Rautjärvi was located. Häyhä's family farm, the land he'd grown up on, the forests he'd hunted in, all were now Soviet territory. Häyhä would never return to his childhood home. His physical recovery took years. His jaw required multiple reconstructive surgeries. Doctors did remarkable work given the era's medical technology, but Häyhä's face was permanently disfigured. His left cheek remained partially collapsed. Speaking remained difficult for the rest of his life. His words were slurred, hard to understand. But he was alive, and Finland was still independent. Häyhä received multiple awards for his service. The Medal of Liberty, Finland's highest military honor. The Cross of Liberty Third Class, 4 Medals of Bravery, honorary promotion from corporal to second lieutenant.
The promotion was unusual. Häyhä had never attended officer training, but Finnish command decided that a man who had personally killed over 500 enemy soldiers deserved officer rank regardless of formal qualifications. In April 1940, still recovering from his injuries, Häyhä was photographed receiving his medals. The photograph shows a small man with a devastated face, standing at attention while officers pinned decorations to his uniform. His expression is stoic, unsmiling. He looks like a man who has seen too much death to celebrate surviving it. After the war, Häyhä returned to farming. Not in Rautjärvi, that was Soviet territory now. Instead, he received a farm from the Finnish government in Ruokolahti, eastern Finland. For the next 60 years, Häyhä lived quietly as a farmer and hunter. He avoided publicity. When journalists sought interviews, he typically declined. When he did speak to reporters, his answers were brief, matter-of-fact, devoid of boasting. Did you feel remorse for the men you killed? I did what I was told to do as best as I could. How did you become such an effective sniper? Practice, patience, I knew my rifle. Were you ever afraid? Of course, everyone is afraid. You do your duty anyway. Häyhä went into a coma. Days passed, then a week, then 2 weeks. In 1950s, Häyhä married but had no children. He continued hunting throughout his life, though post-injury he couldn't shoot with the same accuracy. He attended veteran reunions and occasionally met with military historians researching the Winter War. In 1998, when Häyhä was 92 years old, a reporter asked him if he regretted anything about his service. Häyhä thought for a long moment, then answered, I regret that I was ever forced to become a soldier. War is terrible. I did what I was told to do as best as I could, but I wish there had been no war at all. On April 1, 2002, Simo Häyhä died peacefully in a veterans' nursing home in Hämeenä, Finland. He was 96 years old. He had outlived most of his fellow veterans, outlived the Soviet Union whose soldiers he fought, outlived the war that made him legendary. His funeral was attended by hundreds, veterans, government officials, and ordinary Finns who understood what Häyhä represented. Not glory, not militarism, but the stubborn Finnish determination to survive against impossible odds. He was buried in Ruokolahti, on the land he'd farmed for 60 decades. His gravestone is simple, bearing only his name, dates, and rank. Nothing about the White Death, nothing about 500 kills, just the basic facts of a long life.
Simo Häyhä's confirmed kill count of 505+ remains the highest for any sniper in any war. Some sources claim 542. Finnish military records say at least 505 confirmed, with estimates reaching higher when including unconfirmed kills. To put this in perspective, Soviet sniper Lyudmila Pavlichenko, 309 confirmed kills, entire WW2. Canadian sniper Francis Pegamagabo, 378 confirmed kills, entire WW1. American sniper Chris Kyle, 160 confirmed kills, entire Iraq War career. Häyhä achieved 505+ in 100 days. In one 3-month period, he killed more enemies than most decorated snipers kill in entire careers spanning years. More remarkably, he did it with iron sights. Every other legendary sniper used telescopic scopes. Häyhä refused them, relying on the same basic aiming system infantrymen had used for decades. His tactics have been studied by military snipers worldwide. Camouflage. Häyhä's snow camouflage techniques became standard doctrine. His method of packing snow in his mouth to prevent breath condensation is still taught in cold weather sniper training. Positioning.
His preference for close-range positions, 100 to 150 meters, rather than extreme long range, contradicted conventional sniper doctrine but proved devastatingly effective. Weapon familiarity. His philosophy of knowing one weapon intimately rather than constantly upgrading to newer technology influenced Finnish military culture for decades. Psychological warfare. Häyhä understood that fear could be as effective as bullets. His legend created psychological paralysis in Soviet units that extended far beyond his actual operational area. The Soviet Union never acknowledged the White Death during the war. Admitting one Finnish sniper was demoralizing their forces would have been propaganda disaster. Only after the Cold War ended did Russian military historians begin seriously studying Häyhä's tactics. In Finnish culture, Häyhä became a symbol of sisu, a Finnish concept roughly translating to stoic determination, perseverance against overwhelming odds, refusing to quit regardless of circumstances. He embodied the Finnish Winter War experience, outgunned, outnumbered, fighting in impossible conditions, and somehow surviving. In 2010, Finnish power metal band Sabaton released a song about Häyhä that introduced his story to younger generations globally. The lyrics capture his legend. Almost night, a crimson horizon, painting 1,000 lakes red. As your army approach from the east, a hunter is switching his prey. All alone, a man with his gun wanders into the wild, tracks you down, you cannot hide, once he is onto your trail. The song became popular internationally, spreading Häyhä's story to millions who'd never heard of the Winter War. In 2017, a feature film about Häyhä entered development, though production has repeatedly been delayed. The challenge, according to the screenwriters, is that Häyhä's real story is so extraordinary that depicting it accurately makes it seem like fiction. What Simo Häyhä proved over 100 days in the Finnish winter transcends military tactics or marksmanship skill. He proved that individual excellence applied with absolute dedication can change the course of battles even when facing overwhelming odds. The Soviet Union had tanks, aircraft, artillery, and 750,000 soldiers. Finland had sisu, determination, and Simo Häyhä. Against any rational analysis, Finland should have lost the Winter War in weeks, but Finland fought the Soviets to a standstill, inflicting casualties that shocked the world and forcing Stalin to accept a peace treaty rather than continue an unwinnable war. Häyhä's 505 kills weren't just numbers. They were 505 Soviet soldiers who couldn't advance Finnish lines. They were 505 casualties that demoralized Soviet units and created psychological barriers to offensive operations. They were 505 demonstrations that Finnish soldiers, even vastly outnumbered, could exact devastating costs on invaders. But more than military impact, Häyhä represented something fundamental about Finnish identity. He was not a professional soldier. He was a farmer who picked up his hunting rifle and did what needed doing. He didn't boast. He didn't seek glory. He did his duty, survived horrendous wounds, and went back to farming for 60 years. That humility, that quiet competence, that refusal to be celebrated as a hero, these defined Häyhä as much as his marksmanship. When asked late in life if he was proud of his war record, Häyhä's answer captured everything. I am proud that I served my country when it needed me, but I am not proud that I had to kill. War forced me to kill. I wish there had been no war at all. The deadliest sniper in history wished he'd never fired a shot. That contradiction, the master of death who hated killing, is what makes Simo Häyhä's story transcend military history. He wasn't a warrior who loved combat. He was a man who did terrible things because his country's survival required it, then spent the rest of his life farming and regretting that war had ever come. The White Death killed over 500 men. Simo Häyhä, the farmer from Rautjärvi, wished he'd never had to kill. Both can be true, And in that truth lies the real lesson of his story, that courage and skill in war should never blind us to the tragedy that war was necessary at all. Finland survived because men like Simo Häyhä refused to let it die. But Finland also survived because after the war, men like Simo Häyhä put down their rifles and went back to building rather than destroying. The farmer who became death itself chose life and lived 96 years in quiet testimony that peace is always preferable to war, no matter how legendary war makes you. The Finns are upon you, and they never, ever give up.